Welcome back to the podcast. In our last episode, we compared factory installed acoustic doors versus kit acoustic doors and talked about how those approaches affect performance and installation. Today, we're continuing the conversation and digging into something that surprises a lot of people. The door itself is only part of the acoustic performance equation. I'm joined again by Grace Jacob, IAC Acoustics Architectural Doors and Windows Sales Manager, and Mike Sirna of Hensel Diversified Construction, who installs these systems in the field. Grace, let's have you kick things off. When someone purchases an acoustic door, what kind of performance are they typically expecting? And are there any misunderstandings that ever come up in those discussions?
Yeah, so end users sometimes are looking for what they call something soundproof. Unfortunately, soundproof doesn't exist. What's important is to set the expectations that sound will be reduced but not gone entirely. Let's say they have an STC 55 door specified and they're expecting an STC 55 performance in the field. What they're really looking for and what they're really going to get is this thing we call NIC, and that's the field test equivalent. Because in a lab, to get STC performance, all the conditions are perfect. But on any construction site, you have absolutely no control, right? So typically, you'll have up to a 5-point difference for NIC versus the specified STC. Now, again, sound's not going to be gone, but it will be reduced, and that's kind of the industry standard. Something else is, it depends on what the noise source type is. Some STCs are going to do really great at blocking the sound of speech, but it's going to be different if it's a drum kit on the other side of that door or music. It all kind of comes down to the frequency and the actual loudness of any source type. So making sure that you're working with an acoustical consultant that knows what to look for in the STC reports and is matching up the frequencies that you're concerned about versus the frequencies that are actually being blocked with any particular product.
Thanks, Grace. I think you teed that up nicely for Mike. I'd like to jump in and talk a little bit about the bigger picture. What are some of the factors beyond the door itself that can impact acoustic performance?
So I've always been a fan of the environment where the door is being plugged in is key. We've done stuff where you can have an industrial complex. We did a project for Disney years ago where everything was perfect, but on Tuesdays between 10 and 11, there was some giant industrial punch press working, and the low frequency reverb destroyed all the stuff that we did. Any other time of the day, perfect. Tuesdays between 10 and 11, he basically darkened his studio for that. So I say that environment is key to high performance. If you have the optimum environment, the door is going to perform perfectly. If there's environmental issues, uh, freeway traffic, big truck traffic, um, cars that honk their horns, incessantly. This is all going to be pressures that are going to possibly affect your performance.
And from the installation side, Mike, are there any things you see in the field that can affect how well the door performs?
So I think in the last podcast we talked about the importance of making sure that the opening that the door is going to be plugged into is I say it's a three-axis performance. You have plumb, vertical, and true. And the way I look at it and to describe it is, we use a laser and we look at the edge of the jamb. Is it perfect? Yes. We look at the horizontal top of the header. Is it perfect? Yes. And then you stand in the doorway and you look at the side of the jamb. Is that perfect? If it's tilted to in or out, that's going to affect the door because there are some people who say, well, you can just trim that. These doors, when they're tested, are nice and tight and put in an opening that's perfect. So to get that performance, we need that kind of opening. And it's a challenge in the field because you have people that, hey, we need you to frame these openings and put the drywall on. And they're not doing that from the standpoint of someone like myself who comes in and says, this has got to be pristine. They're just slapping stuff together and they're working down a hallway. So it is critical that the floor is level. It's critical that the the framing is plumb and true. And like I said, we see that sometimes, but most of the times it's a challenge in the field.
Thank you. Now, I'd like to hear from the both of you. What are some of the smaller details people might not think about that make a big difference? Grace, why don't we start with you?
Something I like to emphasize the importance of that usually gets overlooked is the sill plate or the threshold. Same thing. The reason that we encourage a sill plate on every project is because it's going to be a smooth, continuous, flat, reliable place for the bottom seal to have complete and continuous contact. Sound is like water, as you remember, and so it will find any small spot to leak through. So sometimes for aesthetics, I have an architect that doesn't want a sill plate. They like the tile they've chosen, which they're not recognizing has grouting paths that will allow sound through. Or they're putting these on top of carpet and don't realize that that's going to let a ton of sound through. Just because carpet will absorb some sound doesn't mean it's going to block any of it. Those little flanking paths are difficult to mitigate without a threshold. So once the frame and sill plate are aligned, the leaf is then hung and the bottom seal is dropped to make complete and continuous contact with the threshold. Then from there, the frame and sill plate should both be caulked in place to make sure that there's no extra flanking paths. If you remember, I said NIC can typically have up to 5 points difference, but it doesn't always have to be a full 5.
And Mike, from your experience installing these systems, what are details that can make or break performance?
Touching on what Grace said about flanking paths, I've got a great story about a job. They had built these engine dyno cells, and they were CMU, cinder block walls, and they had a door from the testing into the cell. They had double doors to the outside, so they could bring the power sport motorcycle, ATV, side by side in, and then they had a window. And we put them in, and everything was the contractor was like, "Oh, this is great, man! You guys did a great job." And like they pulled a bike in there, and they turned it on, and I had a little noise level meter, and I go, "Yeah, it's performing." I mean, we were knocking down like 60 dB, and they go, "This is awesome." And about 2 months goes by, and I get a call from the contractor in full blown panic mode. Your doors are failing, the windows are failing, and I'm thinking to myself, we sat there and tested these things. So I said, hey, listen, I said, let me come out, let me take a look. So I said, make sure we have something in there that we can test. He goes, okay. So I got out there, and everyone's got their arms folded, and they're obviously not happy. And I said, okay. I said, turn it on the steering. So they start up this. It was a ZX13, huge motorcycle, and it was noisy. And I said, and I was like, I look, and they had a light switch that would control the fan and the lights inside the dyno cell that was through the CMU wall, and it was the box was mounted on the wall. And I go, huh. I go, hey, I said, do me a favor. I said, take that plate off. They took the plate off. There was a 3/4 inch conduit that went through the dyno cell into there, and it wasn't sealed. There was nothing done to it. And I said, there's your problem right there. And they all looked at each other and they went, that was easy. And I go, well, I said, that's just a flanking path. And I said, we tested this and it tested. I said, and then after we got done, you came in and added a bunch of other stuff. So they actually did an audit and went through, and anywhere the conduits penetrated, they sealed it. And guess what? The performance was perfect. So going back to flanking paths are always the Achilles heel. We could put the doors in, they could test and be perfect. If the job's not done, they come in, they add conduits, they add lighting control, they add whatever they do. And most people don't think in terms of noise isolation. And so they gloss over that. And 9 out of 10 times, that's the problem. The flanking path is the Achilles heel.
I think that's a good takeaway. To wrap things up, I'll just round it out with the both of you. If there's one thing listeners should remember when thinking about acoustic door performance, what would it be? Mike, why don't you start, and then Grace, you can take us home.
Acoustic door performance is the critical part of it is the environment. Environmentally, if you are perfect, your door is going to perform like a star. If you have anything that's going to challenge that door's performance and you don't take proactive measures to satisfy that, then your door's not going to perform. That's my takeaway.
For me, I'd say that It's a reminder that soundproof doesn't exist and that the frequency of the noise source will affect the performance of whatever you choose. And then to everyone else, I'd say use the sill plate, please. As much as you can, use the sill plate. Now, I will say, Mike, I think you have a story about a time that you didn't use a sill plate, but the conditions were correct. Could you maybe mention that?
So we had done a project in Florida for a mixed VR company that had an SEC 55 door. And when we were setting the door, we had set the sill plate down, and the end user went, "What's that for?" And I said, "That's how your door seals." Well, the conditions, the lab conditions, it was polished, high polished concrete. It was very nice, very high end place. And the guy says, I don't want that sill plate. I'm going to be rolling carts in and out of here. I don't want to hear the carts banging. Stuff could fall off the cart. It's very sensitive equipment. We don't need to have it jolted. Okay. So I said, so I basically, they signed an acknowledgement saying, hey, we can't guarantee the performance, but, and they said, that's fine. And so when the door was installed and tested, it tested as if it had a sill plate in it. And the reason why is because the concrete was high polished, it was completely dead level, and I mean, like I said, it was perfect. So in that situation, that was the exception to the rule. But I'm with you, Grace. I think that using a sill plate, it's the only way to go.
Great insights from both of you. In the next episode, we're going to shift gears and talk about common acoustic door installation challenges and lessons from the field, including some of the mistakes that can impact performance. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.